Some just know them as the Magnificent Seven, an impressive collection of buildings around the Queen's Park Savannah. We drive past them, jog past them, sit with fresh coconuts and admire their beauty. But do we know the history and the value of one of the Caribbean's most majestic stretches? In March 2016, a cabinet subcommittee headed by Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley was set up to provide oversight on the restoration of historical buildings. This would kick off renovation efforts for some of the nation's most venerated buildings, like this familiar monument. The senior project manager at UDECOT, Bernard Capuno, says Whitehall had a lot of leaks on the southern side of all the walls. The plaster was fading and the columns on the eastern side were in the worst condition. All the timber framing was deteriorated and infested with bats or unwanted pests. Whitehall stands witness to our fascinating history, a backdrop of the Queen's Park Savannah. It is the backdrop to more than 100 years of our history. Whitehall was designed and built as a private residence in 1904 by Joseph Leon Agostini, a wealthy cocoa planter. Named Rosenweg, the German word for path of roses, its style is reminiscent of the Agostini family's heritage, a mixture of Moorish, Venetian, and Corsican architectural influences. A downturn in the cocoa industry and Agostini's sudden death in 1906 forced his family to sell to an American businessman named Robert Henderson. The price tag? Less than half of the $80,000 it took her husband to design and build it. Robert Henderson's family named the mansion Whitehall for the brilliantly white coral stone used for its construction. Whitehall would be home to several offices over the years, including the British Council, the Trinidad Art Society, and the Government Broadcasting Unit. It was also headquarters to the occupying U.S. Armed Forces during World War II. In 1954, the government bought the building for the grand sum of $123,000. This impressive structure now belonged to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Shortly after gaining independence, the newly formed government of Trinidad and Tobago designated Whitehall the home of the office of the Prime Minister. The late Dr. Eric Williams was the first Prime Minister to occupy Whitehall. Legend has it that the ghost of Joseph Agostini himself sat on the veranda looking out at the savannah, making up for the time he never spent in Rosenweg with his family. Chilling. Ghost stories aside, Whitehall has also seen its share of public figures from all over the world. It's even been used by the international film industry as a set location for the film adaptation of The Mystic Masood, Trinidadian author V.S. Naipaul's first novel. Home again to the office of the Prime Minister, Whitehall will also be open for business, guided tours, and a focus on cultural tourism will ensure that its revival remains a wise investment. At the reopening of Whitehall on the 29th of August 2019, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley remarked that it's easy to take things for granted, but a building like this, in the context of Trinidad and Tobago's history and resource base, is priceless.
You've heard of restorations in this building and occupations and so on. But the restoration that we've just done cost $32 million. For some people, this might be the subject or the headline, but it's not that, because you would have heard that it was bought for $123,000. Can't even get a cheap motor car for that these days. But I'm sure that at the time when that purchase was made, there might have been somebody in the nation who would have had a problem with all that money being spent on an old house. But ladies and gentlemen, symbolism is important. History is important because it connects you to who you are. From time to time, whether we know it or not, we reflect on ourselves. Who are we? What am I? And nations do that too. what makes this nation worthwhile.
Renovation, revival, restoration. Our history is not just stories about the past. It is a resource, an opportunity to leverage our unique identity to create something even more powerful. A big part of that unique Trinbagonian identity can be found in spaces like Killarney. Built in 1902 with brick trimmed with limestone, Italian marble, and topped with turreted features, the grand Scottish baronial-style home resembles a wing of Balmoral Castle, one of the British royal family's most famous residences. Killarney's unique design is a source of tremendous pride and a centerpiece of historical tourism in the capital. Killarney was built in 1904 by Charles Fourier Stollmeyer. Later given to his son Conrad as a wedding gift, it was dubbed Killarney, after the place in Ireland that Conrad's wife hoped to spend her honeymoon. The mansion's fortress-like appearance led the occupying American soldiers to call it the castle, and so Killarney became Stollmeyer's Castle. In 1972, Dr. John Stollmeyer sold the castle to Henry A. Mahabier, an insurance executive, with specific instructions that the building be used for residential purposes only. The building would languish for 7 years until it was purchased by the government in 1979. Restoration work was carried out by Citizens for Conservation in the late 1990s, but it was not until March 2016 that specific steps were made by the government to oversee the full revival.
Some of the restoration work was already completed. However, there was a significant amount of work still to be completed, which entailed the restoration of the roof, the floors, some of the doors, windows, the verandas, and the annex building referred to as the stables building to the west of the main building, in addition to landscaping works.
Killarney was completed and handed over to the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts in May of 2018. It is now one of Trinidad and Tobago's most impressive arts and cultural centers.
It is used for private functions mainly, primarily for private functions and for school tours as well, where people would go into the history of the building and shed some light, and they would be able to tour the building itself and see the work that was completed, admire the work that was completed.
Carifesta 14 would see Killarney as the space for its visual arts icons of Caribbean art in Trinidad and Tobago exhibition. People from all over the world visited our shores for the Caribbean's biggest arts festival, a massive success and a chance to see our history on full display. Although it is a cultural space, don't expect to attend a fete there next carnival. Killarney's restoration has come with strict rules about preserving the facilities for future generations. Imagine how pleased family patriarch Charles Frederick Stollmeyer, a known teetotaler, would be to hear this. So, what's next on the restoration agenda? With Killarney and Whitehall operational, this magnificent 7 site now stands in sharp focus. The most deteriorated of the historical sites, Millefleur is a story of hope. Perhaps one of the most refined structures still standing in Trinidad and Tobago, Millefleur was the home of the Prada family for 19 years. Built and named in 1904 by Mrs. Prada as a gift for her husband, Dr. Enrique Prada, the mayor of Port of Spain, from 1914 to 1917, the house was constructed by George Brown of the Trinidad Trading Company. The intricately carved balustas, the elaborate cast iron columns and brackets, and the marble treads and risers all fit in with Millefleur's French provincial style. After being sold to the Salvatore family in 1923 and the Matouk family in 1973, Millefleur was purchased by the government in June of 1979. Concerned citizens have long called for the restoration of Millefleur, which was in a severe state of deterioration until work began in 2016. It was even said that Millefleur might need to be demolished. In 2018, UDECOT carried out dilapidation surveys as citizens waited with bated breath to find out, can Millefleur be saved? The senior project manager once again explained that Millefleur had construction issues from top to bottom. He said that there was a popular belief that the building would be completely knocked down. In fact, it was suggested that someone should throw a match to wipe out the building and start all over again. The national community can't wait to see how the Magnificent Seven's most persevering structure turns out. Millefleur, a piece of our past, has now been given a future. Each with its own character, style, and story. The Magnificent Seven stand apart. They capture the energy and free spirit of Trinidad and Tobago, our multicultural origins, and our creative individuality. These beacons of dignity and stability from our past will breathe new life into our society as we set our sights on what's next.